for very good reason. Coral reefs are called the rainforests of the seas, basically. I mean, they're one of Earth's most diverse ecosystems, and they do provide significant ecological, economic, and societal benefits. Some estimates as high as $9.8 trillion per year. And on our watch, we're watching the destruction and death of coral reefs around the world. I mean, bleaching was first seen in 1980.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Climate Emergency Forum. My name is Regina, and we're going to talk today about our vanishing coral reefs. Coral reefs are an amazing phenomenon on this beautiful planet, and as a matter of fact, they have often been referred to as the rainforests of the seas. They are spectacular, and if you've never had a chance to go snorkeling or scuba diving, I highly recommend it. If you can't do that, I've noticed that there are some screensavers on smart TVs that will simulate life on a coral reef. And it's pretty amazing. They are less than 0.1% of the world's ocean area, about half the area of France, but they provide a home for at least 25% of all marine species. So if you don't care about the coral reefs and the amazing natural phenomenon they are, you may want to care about the fact that they are home to a great amount of marine life. And as we know, all things depend on other things, and everything in the ocean finds its food in the ocean. So if you happen to like seafood and enjoy it upon occasion, you will care about this topic. There are many, many reasons to care about our coral reefs, not just the fact that they are beautiful and provide home for 25% of the planet's living beings. They are also an economic boon to many countries, and they provide jobs to many people as well. They're really, really important. The only problem is they are declining precipitously, absolutely precipitously. Most of the coral reefs are shallow. You can find them in shallow waters. There are deep sea coral reefs. The shallow ones have declined by 50% since 1950. There are many reasons for this. Unfortunately, one of the things that I mentioned, which was snorkeling, because they're very shallow, you have to be so careful not to touch them. They're very fragile. People think of coral reefs as just hard rock that you can like touch and grab onto and level yourself. Absolutely not. These are living entities. And so when people do go to enjoy them, they can scratch off and slough off some of the surface with their fins. They can touch them. Some people who have not a clue actually stand on them. And please, if you're ever snorkeling, don't stand on the coral reefs. Even the thing that's so important to many of us, which is sunscreen, this can be damaging to coral reefs. But I haven't mentioned one of the most damaging things, and that is our warming oceans. Our oceans are warming tremendously. Tremendously. So we have had so much heat recently. We all know this. We're all talking about how hot it is. Last year, and as I record this, last year is 2023, was incredibly hot. Again, reaching records, as they say, every single year. The hottest year on record. Well, 2023 was a very hot year, both in the land and in the ocean. And if you've watched this channel for a while, you may know that oceans absorb about 90% of the heat, the excess heat caused by global warming. So last year was the hottest year in over 170 years, and it exceeded scientists' predictions. And of course, we have to factor in El Nino, but that is not the only reason. And I want to say something else that we've said a lot on this channel, which is exceeding scientists' predictions. We keep hearing it and we keep hearing it. And we just wonder, when are things going to exceed predictions so greatly that they spin out of control? I am going to head straight over to Paul. Paul, do you have anything to share on the science about this and the exceeding warmth and how it's affecting our coral reefs?
Yes, thank you, Regina. And for very good reason, coral reefs are called the rainforest of the seas, basically. I mean, they're one of Earth's most diverse ecosystems, and they do provide significant ecological, economic, and societal benefits. Some estimates as high as $9.8 trillion per year. I mean, wrap your head around that number. It's a huge number. And on our watch, we're watching the destruction and death of coral reefs around the world. I mean, bleaching was first seen in 1980, and now it's becoming more and more common. Basically, the coral loses the symbiotic algae because the water temperatures are too warm. And if the water temperatures stay elevated for a period of time, then the coral just dies and then gets overtaken by, just basically plain algae. It can happen, very, very quickly. Multiple bleachings are occurring around the world more and more often. I mean, basically, NOAA has this great website called NOAA's Coral Reef Watch. They basically confirm this is the fourth global coral bleaching event around the world. So it started basically in February 2023, and it's continuing through now. It's in the North and South Hemisphere. Mostly it covers the tropics, but the tropics are expanding as the water gets warmer. So it's in the Atlantic, it's in the Pacific, it's in the Indian Ocean, it's also in the Red Sea, the Persian Gulf, the Gulf of Aden, and it's basically around the planet. The largest bleaching event on record, in terms of the longest, the most disruptive, longest duration, most intense, was the 2014 to 2017 event. But this one, is still ongoing. To give you an example of, in Florida in 2023, the bleaching started early, has lasted longer, and it's the most severe on record. And we all know that the ocean temperatures in the Northern Hemisphere have warmed significantly. They're much beyond 4 or 5 standard deviations above normal. Part of that, according to James Hansen, is due to the reduction of sulfur. So there's fewer low-lying clouds over the ocean, so more absorption of solar radiation. Now, the NOAA Coral Reef Watch, like I said, is an excellent site. You can look at the bleaching alerts. They have something called degree heating weeks to see the intensity and duration of these events. They have a map which they call hotspots to look at the worst areas for coral bleaching. And of course, it all comes down to the sea surface temperatures, and they have those and also anomalies and trends in sea surface temperatures. So all of the data that you want is on that, basically NOAA's Coral Reef Watch. I mean, I, as a scuba diver and a snorkeler, an avid snorkeler and scuba diver my whole life, I've been fortunate to snorkel and scuba dive on many coral reefs, in the past, and also on kelp forests off California. And those kelp forests aren't there either. So this water, although we're focusing on coral, the seagrasses and the kelp beds and mangroves around the world are also being severely stressed by the very, very anomalously high water temperatures. And, as you mentioned, the coral reefs are vital for the gestation periods of many species of fish. So, when fish are hatched and, when they're juveniles, very young, about 25% of the world's fish spend some time in their life cycle when they're very young, mostly in coral reefs regions. And of course, because it's a symbiotic bacteria, phytoplankton, that has this relationship with the coral. That's why most coral reefs, they need the sunlight for these plants that are on the rock, the coral rock, need the sunlight. So that's why they're in the surface waters. And of course, it's the surface waters that are, warming the quickest and the worst around the planet. So we're witnessing basically the destruction of the globe's coral reefs. It is going to happen. It's happening ongoing on an ongoing fashion. There's just going to be none left soon. And I think of the Great Barrier Reef off Australia, like completely becoming just dead rock with this ugly looking green algae covering it. So yeah, that's where we're heading.
Thank you so much, Paul. I no doubt do not have the amount of scuba diving, and I have no scuba diving experience, and I certainly probably do not have the snorkeling experience you have. I've been to a few places. Key West was amazing for me. I have to say that I was able to do just a tiny bit of snorkeling in the Red Sea when we were at COP in Sharm El-Sheikh. And of course, this was a fringing reef. The fringing reefs are those reefs that follow along the shore. It's spectacular and amazing. And the fringing reefs of the Red Sea, they're some of the best and most developed in the world. It's incredible because you can just walk straight, from the shore into the water and bam, there's a reef. So the proximity to the shore is great. I think that we can really see the financial implications in this region because a lot of the resorts in the Red Sea, for better or for worse, have built their hotels around certain parts of this reef, and then they sort of de facto own it, and then the people who are in that hotel can go snorkel. But there are very little protections. Like I literally saw people, they're so close to the shore, I saw people grabbing onto it, fins kicking it. It's really sad for me when you go to enjoy and you see others who also want to enjoy, but they don't know how to do so safely. And there aren't measures in place to make sure that the tourists are giving these reefs the proper respect they deserve. And one of the things that I think is really important to point out is the measure of time. That is, some of these fringing reefs can take 10,000 years to form. An atoll can take up to 30 million years. But let's just take the low end, 10,000 years. We have this amazing reef that took way beyond our lifetime to come to being. And in a matter of a few decades, it's brought to its knees by us. Coral bleaching was first noticed in the 1980s. And since then, it's become it's become almost normal. So this goes to show you what we're up against. And now I was going to turn it over to Peter.
Actually, you've reminded me, Regina, of one of the best ways I think to see the coral reefs is via the glass bottom boat. So at that COP conference in Sharm El-Sheikh, Egypt, we went out on the glass bottom boat, and it's a way that a lot of tourists can go and access the beauty of the coral reefs while they still exist. It's not very disruptive. If they were electric boats, even better. But you can get a large number of people out there very close above the coral and see the majestic beauty of it. So
yeah, that's even better. And I'm sure you can tell us, Paul, that the view was every bit as good through a glass bottom boat, if not better, than if you were in the sea.
Exactly. Yes.
So everyone wins. Plus, you get to stay warm and dry. Peter, I know that coral reefs are also a passion of yours. I would love to hear what you have to say, especially in light of this new news that we have coming out about the coral reefs.
Thanks, Regina. Thanks, Paul, for putting things squarely on the map as where we are today with the Great Barrier Reef, of course, which is the sort of world's flagship coral reef. But we're talking about all the tropical reefs this time. Now, I want to say that although this is the worst ever coral bleaching, it appears that it's a very different and shockingly worse change of events, which is, I suppose, nothing different with climate change, but this is quite shocking. This is a very passionate, yes, emotional situation. For example, Terry Hughes, I follow Terry Hughes on Twitter, and he's the world's leading expert on coral reefs. He's the recently resigned, retired from heading up the Australian Barrier Reef Scientific Survey. few days ago, he posted this on Twitter. Scientists never, ever post this kind of stuff, I should point out. So he told us that I showed the results of aerial surveys of the bleaching of the Great Barrier Reef to my students. And then we wept. End of message. So this is the fifth major the barrier reef bleach in the past 8 years. And as Paul said, the bleaching only occurred very recently. I think the late 80s was the first report of coral reef bleaching. So this is completely unnatural and abnormal. And it's getting, like everything else, it's getting very, very rapidly worse. The other difference of this, there are two other differences. One difference is that corals are dying already. One of the things we take a little bit of comfort in is that when the hot water forces the little organisms out of the coral reef skeleton, things will cool off and they'll come back and the reef will recover. And normally it takes many, many bleachings, one after another, for coral to actually die. So the divers have found very recently that reefs are dying. When they dive down there, the smell of the sulfur is bad. It's toxic. It's completely different the situation where they've ever dove before. The reefs are dying there, and they're getting already covered with algae. So the sort of terminal event of coral reefs, which is the end of a reef, is it becomes covered with algae. And of course, looks quite different, obviously. They're also disintegrating. So it's not only bleaching, it's dying has taken place, and disintegration of parts of the reef has taken place. We've got the last survey was 80% of the barrier reef was showing evidence of bleaching, was bleached. Only 3% of the reefs that they surveyed were not bleaching, were not bleached. Now, here's the very odd thing. As Paul mentioned, I make use of the excellent NOAA Coral Reef Watch. They've got maps of just about every type everywhere. But it's been very strange because although the entire tropical reefs of the world are at a high level of alert, as Paul mentioned, the measure of the weekly heat duration, everything's on high. When you look at the barrier reef, it sort of looks okay. It doesn't match the other things. So I think only yesterday I came across what the problem was. This is different bleaching. It's being bleached deep, deep, deep. The bleaching is extending down to about 60 feet. I mean, that's absolutely, completely unheard of. The Terry Hughes also said the extent and the severity and the duration of the bleach is far worse than anything that's ever been recorded. Far worse. So I want to finish off to say, yeah, this is emotional, this is personal, and this is also reflective on who we are. Back in 2005, I believe it was, and I was catching up on climate change research, I found out that the scientists were united in saying that 1.5 degrees C, we would practically lose the Great Barrier Reef and all the coral reefs. And that was a big reason why I started sort of campaigning and communicating at that time that we must not ever go above 1.5 degrees C. So at least we've got scientists and everybody agreed upon that. So my final comment is that when I was working with some environmental colleagues up in the city of Prince George, and we were going around to Rotary clubs and giving presentations, of course, one of the themes was the Great Barrier Reef, because it had recently been, relatively recently, been shown from space. So this is our largest living organism on planet Earth. It's not living, it's also the greatest example of mutualism, cooperative development and growth between species. So it's very, very, very special. So the final point is the coral reef is dying, but what does it mean about us? Right? Are our emotions dying? Right? Our who we are, our connection with the natural world, our value emotionally, with the wonder and magnificence of nature, is that dying? It appears it is. So all of us And we know when we're not dead to these issues, we really have to twist some emotional arms of the rest of the world because we've lost the Great Barrier Reef. There's silly stuff of scientists doing interesting stuff, but it's silly, laboratory experiments. Barrier Reef is dead. It's been killed. It's been killed by fossil fuel emissions. We must stop fossil fuel industry in its tracks, and we can't wait. We've got to start doing it now and making it very, very, very serious. How much more do we want to lose? So thanks. That's my comments.
Thank you, Peter. Very important comments indeed. I really, really like the point that you brought up with this interspecial harmony and community that comes together and is able to create something beautiful, and this non-competitive and sort of like the brutish sense way of living. And I think it's a metaphor that we should all adopt as Homo sapiens. It is a metaphor and way of living that we have unfortunately failed at due to the fact that we tend to see ourselves as these godlike beings, that every other living being is subordinate and inferior to us, and that the planet and everything on it was given to us to do with as we will. And it is just a very, very problematic mindset. When you said that it has been taken from us, people who care about the planet and life, this is very, very grievous. This is very difficult. This is very painful. What you're saying is just 100% true. All that is beautiful, not all, a lot, all that is beautiful actually in the natural world is imperiled. It's imperiled because a few Homo sapiens, with their rapacious greed, their desire to maintain that greed and thereby impart falsehoods to the rest of humanity, these people have really done a sin. I really just wish that we could wake the world up to the extreme tragedy that we are living through in this time. It is without a doubt an absolute tragedy. Paul, do you have any thoughts on any of this or what Peter just shared?
Yeah, I want to elaborate a little bit on what actually happens when a coral reef dies and, how it's basically formed. So the coral itself is, very, very hard, almost a rock-like, high in calcium. So it's almost like a, bone, if you like, or hard rock. You have polyps that are forming the coral, but you also have this symbiosis between the coral and the algae. The algae gives, for healthy coral reefs, it gives the vibrant colors of the reefs. And of course, those colors can only be seen in shallower waters. As you go deeper, you lose color, of course. So the reefs are growing and they're healthy and they're vibrant, and there's huge interconnections between the living reef and the fish that occupy it. And many, many fish, like I said, spend their juvenile times on the reefs because the reefs provide huge protection. So as the water gets too warm, the algae just basically take off. They can't survive, on the coral, so they leave and they take all the color with them. The corals then become very white and bleached. And if the water is warm enough, if there's enough cycles of bleaching, then the algae don't return. And when they don't return, the symbiotic algae don't return. So just plain run-of-the-mill green algae goes and occupies that space. The world doesn't like a vacuum. Nature doesn't like a vacuum. So normal algae go, and that gives the reef this darkish color. So it's difficult to tell between a healthy reef and a dead reef on satellites. Then, of course, the coral stops growing and there's wave action and erosion. So over time, the coral just wears down and basically gets pulverized into sand. So the death of the coral reef means that it is eventually quite quickly replaced with just a sandy, bottom as if nothing was there before. So, I mean, that's brutally what's happening. And the reefs aren't dying, the reefs are actively being killed by pretty much 10, 15, 100 companies that are cranking out fossil fuels and have misled the public for years. And now we're paying the price and consequences. And, I would say one of the major consequences that we're seeing is the loss of the global coral reefs. And this is a tipping point in the biodiversity chain of life on this planet. It's a real tipping point because are those fish that spent the time on the coral reefs, are they actually going to even survive themselves, or are they just going to vanish from the oceans, greatly cutting down on marine biodiversity? So, and also the warming of the water, it's part of a bigger problem. When oceans get really, really warm, they get much more stratified. So there's much less vertical mixing. So you don't get oxygen going down. You don't get nutrients coming up. You end up getting the hydrogen sulfide on the bottom, killing all of the life down there. And this is how you eventually get the so-called can-filled oceans or dead oceans. And so this is all part of a procedure and process where we're basically killing the planet.
Thank you so much, Paul. That was a very important distinction when you said that the coral reefs aren't dying, they're being killed. And this is an act of ecocide. It is, we all know that one of the worst crimes that anyone can commit is that of murder, but somehow when the murder is perpetrated on a non-human living being, it gets a pass. And this is the type of thing I just don't understand. Peter, do you have any closing thoughts?
Oh yeah, thanks, Regina. And Paul, thanks for that excellent description of the science. You really do that so well. I think the question that we all have to ask is, how do we stop this? What needs to happen? So the first thing, obviously, that needs to happen is that because the governments, right, are pushing more and more fossil fuel extractions and more burning, there are vast new extractive projects happening all over the world. We are burning more coal. The worst thing we could possibly do for all life on the planet is to continue burning coal. Last year, China burned a lot more coal. And also last year, the world as a whole outside China burned more coal. Okay, it was only 2% more, but it was more coal, damn it. So that we have to stop. How do we stop it? Well, the only way, and it has a great historical back and reputation, is protest, of course. Some young people are protesting. And what's happening? Governments are treating them severely. They go to court, the young people go to court, and they make what is called a pleading. And it is a pleading, right? We want to have a planet to live up in. And there have been many, many of these cases in the past few years. And it's great that they are. But do you know, every single case of the young people was fought tooth and nail by their own governments, by their own government's lawyers. So we have to allow and encourage our young people to protest, and they're being stopped. And that is the very worst part of all this. How much do we care about our children? Do they not have a right, to inherit a functioning planet, right? They're not going to see the Great Barrier Reef unless they watch it on their screens, on their laptops. It will be gone. My final plea is the governments to at least allow our young people to make protest about this. Final point, this could all be stopped so simply because our governments are subsidizing fossil fuels, and it's subsidizing it more every year. So they're killing off all of the tropical warm water reefs for sure, because they're giving more and more money to the fossil fuel industry. I call these planet killers, right? The fossil fuel industry, who has known about this for now, we know now for the past 40 years or so, they're knowingly killing the planet, right? They knowingly are. It's time to use that language and hope that maybe that will have an effect.
Just to add one quick thing to Peter's comments, Of course, government subsidies are what we talk about most often, but it turns out that there's most of the oil production is from nationally owned oil companies. So governments actually own the companies and run the companies. It's not that they just subsidize oil companies, they actually own the companies that are doing this. So this is why the problem is so insidiously difficult to stop.
I think that's a very important point, and thank you so much, Peter, for bringing it up. The fact that when the public speaks out against the murder of our planet, they are branded as terrorists. We saw what happened at Standing Rock some years ago. The people who fought against the pipeline going through sacred Native American territories, they protested valiantly and were treated horribly. And it's a very scary time when we definitely see a crackdown on free speech, right to freely assemble, and question what these governmental entities are doing. And that's a very scary thing. So thank you so much, both of you, for bringing that out. And, I think that's why, and we'd like to think that why we're doing here is very important. We may be a tiny voice, but we need many, many voices. Many tiny voices speak loudly. So the fact that we're able to be here right now, reaching you, is so very important. And we appreciate you being a part of our audience. And so many of you are regulars. And thank you for coming back. And those of you who are new, we welcome you. So please, if you haven't yet, consider subscribing, like, and share this video with others who may want to learn more about what's happening to the beautiful oceans and the inhabitants in those oceans. And we want to thank you so much. Thank you for being a part of our community, and we look forward to seeing you next time at the Climate Emergency Forum.